You're listening to WVOX 1460 AM in Westchester, New York. I'm Tom Sullivan, and I'm happy to introduce my guest. Kathleen Fearn-Banks is a professor of communications at the University of Washington in Seattle. And prior to that, she worked at NBC Television for many years. Professor Fearn-Banks is an expert in the field of crisis communications and is the author of the Historical Dictionary of African American Television. She is also at work on a book about the great comedian Flip Wilson, which will be published next year. Professor, welcome and thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
This is a real honor for me. I'd like to begin by asking you a question. Pete Hamill wrote a book several years ago called Why Sinatra Matters, and I'd like to start off by asking you, why does Flip Wilson matter?
Oh my gosh, this is a difficult question, but I would say the main thing is that he was the first African American comedian or performer to sustain a hit variety show. And because of him, the people who have followed have been able to do that. Television gives somebody a chance, and if that person jumps in and makes it work, then someone else can jump in afterwards. But you just have to have that first person succeed. And he was able to do that in 1970.
I remember, well, actually, I'm a little too young to remember this, but I've seen it in reruns. Nat King Cole had a variety show for a while in the late 50s, and it's a wonderful program. I've seen clips of it. But unfortunately, and I understand he even got good ratings, but unfortunately there were problems with advertising. There were stations in the South that refused to air the program. It's a little difficult to believe now for someone as beloved as he was.
That's true, and NBC had to carry the Nat King Cole show without sponsors.
That's true.
And the people who appeared on the show, the guest stars, didn't get paid. They were paid with television sets and things like that. And that was unfortunate just in the 50s. Not too much longer before Flip did.
Yeah, a lot of people would not even realize that now. So there were certainly other programs, and when Bill Cosby did the I Spy program in the mid-'60s, that was a very successful program as well. But they had a lot of the same issues, but that show did well. But Flip had the first successful variety program.
That's correct.
And if
you think about it, we really don't have a variety program now. We have talk shows, but there's no real variety show, as that was. And so many people don't even know what we mean when we talk about a variety show. Carol Burnett survived a little bit after Flip ended his show, but we really haven't had any variety shows for years.
That's true, and I think it's unfortunate because I loved that format, and so many of those shows are great. And it's interesting because you can buy DVDs. If you see some of these infomercial programs on TV, they advertise like the Carol Burnett show or the Dean Martin show. I don't know if are there DVDs of Flip's program, because I have not seen those advertised.
I have not seen any either. I've only seen the excerpts the television airs, and that's a half-hour version of the one-hour show. And I don't think the whole show is for sale anywhere. I don't think any of the whole intact one-hour shows are for sale.
That is very unfortunate because they're wonderful programs. And I remember a couple of years ago, I believe it was the TV Land Network, started airing. It was kind of a cut-up version of the Flip Wilson show. I believe they were half-hour segments. And it is unfortunate. I've heard that there's a problem. One of the reasons why you don't see more of these shows on TV is because the music that they use, all these shows used a lot of music, and it's kind of prohibitively expensive to get the rights to the music. Anytime you air a musical performance on one of these, you have to pay the songwriter, you have to pay the publisher, you have to pay the musicians who played on it, and if they're dead, you have to pay their estates.
Their estates. That's
Yeah,
right.
and so I'm told that that's why you don't see the Johnny Carson Tonight Show, for example, or the Dean Martin Show, or the Flip Wilson program. And I think it's unfortunate, because I think to really appreciate what Flip did and what some of these other people did, you really need to show these programs in their entirety. They're wonderfully entertaining.
Yeah, that's true. And having his show, remember, it was in the round,
Yes, I do remember
where the
that.
audience was all around him, and the way the show progressed, it just doesn't work that well in a half-hour version.
No, you really need, the whole rhythm of the program. I think you really need to, and when I've seen some of these edited versions, you always miss something. Because I remember seeing the shows originally, and I'm like, oh my God, why did they leave that out?
Yeah.
But now you worked at NBC for a long time.
Right. I started working at NBC as a publicist in 1969, and Flip's show began in the fall of 1970.
Right.
And I met him really around Christmas time in 1970. And shortly thereafter, I was assigned to work on his show. And then we became friends very fast, and we're friends until he died in 1998.
Yeah, he died, I believe he was almost 65 years old when he died.
Yes, that's true, right. In fact, what's so odd is he had a lot of brothers and sisters, and most of his brothers died at the age of 64.
Is that right? Now, he came from Jersey City, if I'm correct?
Right.
Born and raised in
Correct.
Jersey City. Large family.
Mm-hmm.
And there were problems in the family, and I've heard stories, you can correct me if I'm wrong about this, about him being in foster care and youth facilities. What exactly was the story with Flip's family?
Yeah, he was in foster care for several years. He and a sister and a brother, I believe, were in foster care for several years. Their mother and father separated, and the father was trying to keep the children, but the social workers would not allow that. So they put the younger children in foster care.
So he seems to have had more of an ongoing relationship with his father, would you say, than with his mother?
That's kind of hard to say. He loved his mother, but she did leave. She did leave, and she took the baby, the child that was younger than Flip, and that was kind of a problem for him. That why didn't she take him too? And then she married another man somewhere in New York City, and so he was in touch with his mother. It wasn't that he didn't know where she was. All the children knew where she was.
Okay.
It's just that she was not in the home, and social services people just did not permit that.
Now, he, I believe, enlisted in the Air Force at a very young age.
Yeah. He put his age up to get into the Air Force, and he told me it was primarily because he wanted to have nice clothes.
Okay. And
he wanted money in his pocket, and not that you have a lot of money in the Air Force, but you definitely eat every day. So that's what he did, and he was stationed on Guam for a while, and that's where he started to do his comedy.
that's where he got his nickname too, I am told.
Yeah, the other guys said he flipped out when he would tell his stories, and so that flip came up from that.
He was Clero Wilson, I believe, was his real
right.
name.
Clerow,
Right. And that was his father's name. He was Clero Wilson Jr.
Father was Clero.
Okay.
Yeah, right.
Spelled differently, but the same name.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Now, he would have, if I got my chronology right, he would have enlisted around the time that the military was desegregated. I believe it was like 1950 that Harry Truman desegregated the armed forces. So it was a newly integrated armed forces that he enlisted in. What did he encounter difficulties during his service time with racism? Did you ever talk about that, or?
Not much, but I just remember him saying that on Guam there was some separation because the black soldiers had no contact with any women there. And he talked about there was some racism involved there. But he didn't talk about anything actually within the military that was bad. And being funny, everybody likes you when you're funny.
That's true.
And
yes.
that helped him a lot, yeah.
I would imagine, and I understand it was really his buddies in the Air Force who said, you should be doing this. You could make people laugh professionally.
That's exactly true. Right, and that encouraged him, and he did when he got out.
Now, I have heard that when he was discharged, he found himself in San Francisco. This is what I heard. And that he was working, I think he was like a bellhop or something in a hotel, and they had a nightclub in the hotel, and that was when he made his first attempts at performing on stage. Do I have that right? Or?
Yeah, you do. It was the Manor Plaza Hotel in San Francisco. He showed it to me years later. I don't know if it's still there now, and I don't know if it changed his name or what the story is. But he was a bellhop, and then eventually he would hang around the club, and eventually they let him go on. And he was good, and that was further encouragement to try his comedy as a career.
I heard that he didn't have an act originally. He just kind of went up on stage and improvised, and he did a thing where he would pretend to be drunk and pretend, I don't know if that's even true, but that's what he did initially, and people responded to that, and he moved on from there.
Yeah, I don't know that story. Now, that could very well be true, but he didn't have an act. He had to prepare one, and Flip went scientifically about developing an act. That's something a lot of people don't know, and I hope to cover in the book. But he had a notebook, and he wrote down everything that he found funny about other comedians.
Right.
Why was it funny? Was it the way they delivered the joke? Was it the joke itself? Was it their mannerisms? All this he took careful notes about, and so he would know how he would do his own act when he got it together, and he eventually developed stories.
Yeah, that's one thing I noticed about him, and his whole style of comedy was telling stories. It wasn't setups and punchlines the way most comedians work. And I think of people like Myron Cohen, who most people wouldn't remember, who was a storyteller. Danny Thomas was kind of a storyteller. And that was kind of the way that Flip worked. He would tell stories about Columbus discovering America. He'd tell stories about his minister's wife. He'd tell stories about a baby on a train. And he was just hysterically funny. And that seemed to be, it was kind of an older way of working, but he certainly put his own spin on that, and it worked beautifully for him.
Yeah, and it worked, and that's why he got on television, I believe, because in those days, you couldn't have a dirty joke on television.
Right.
You couldn't have a dirty word. And his stories were always, let's say, clean.
Yes.
They were. Even in the nightclubs, it wasn't necessary to do that. And so it was easy for him to transfer from clubs to television.
That's interesting because again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I have heard that a person who helped him out early on, who became a kind of mentor to him, was Red Fox.
Red Fox was his idol. And he talked about how Red Fox and Nipsey Russell and Slappy White were the comedians that he admired. And he would certainly watch them whenever he saw them. Well, Red Fox went on The Tonight Show, and Johnny Carson asked him, "Are there other young comedians out there? Are there young comedians out there who we might expect to see soon?" And Red said, "There's a guy out there named Flip Wilson who's so funny it's scary." And that's how his name was first mentioned on television, and Johnny Carson had him on.
Well, it's interesting because if you look, thank God for YouTube, because you can see so many wonderful clips. There's a great old black and white film clip from The Tonight Show. I believe it was 1965. Might have been Flip's very first TV appearance. He went on with Johnny Carson, and he told the ugly baby joke on the baby on the train. And it's funny, they cut to Carson, and he almost fell off his chair laughing at Flip Wilson, which was, if Carson liked you, you were in. And he definitely liked Flip. And that was his very first appearance. And it's interesting. He was so masterful for somebody who wasn't used to being on TV. He just did a wonderful stand-up. And I guess that must have opened a lot of doors for him.
Yeah, also he had the record for being bumped off the show, too. If the show goes too long and somebody doesn't get on, you're bumped. And Flip was bumped more than anybody at that time. But he said it was just fine because he had to come to the studio every day, and they paid him every day.
So you got paid whether they put you on.
You got paid whether he worked or not, he said it was just fine, right? And then he got on, and it worked, and then he hosted the show, guest hosted the show.
I remember seeing him do that. But I'm imagining that when you finally get to go on TV, especially a big show like The Tonight Show, it opens a lot of doors, and suddenly, because he was a nightclub comedian, and he must have gotten him a lot of jobs, I would think, all over the country. And he did become one of the leading nightclub headliners in America in the late 1960s. And I know in addition to Carson, he was on Ed Sullivan quite a bit, and I saw him on the Dean Martin show. And he really, before he had his own show, had become a very hot comedian. Right.
He had an NBC special that preceded the series. I guess that was to try it out to see if it would work. Yeah. And in clubs, he did the Playboy circuit for a while.
For Hefner, had a chain of clubs all over the country, Playboy nightclubs, and he worked those. Mm-hmm. So he was already doing very well. Now, even before he had his show. Now, on the personal side, I know he was married a couple times. When did he first get married?
Well, actually, he was. I guess we might say twice. The first time is a little bit curious, but there's the children's mother, Blondell, who I think is still in Florida, and don't think they were actually technically married, but they were together for many years. And I asked him, why didn't he get married? And he said she was already married to somebody. It was one of those situations.
She was legally married to somebody else.
Where a lot of ladies in Florida would marry people just to get money, people who want to be citizens and something like that. So I think it was that kind of situation. And then he married Cookie in the, I believe, 80s in Los Angeles. Cookie was from Cambodia, and those were the two marriages.
Okay. Now, so he gets his own TV series, weekly series, and it's a hugely successful program. I seem to remember there was an album, I think it was called Cowboys and Colored People. Am I right about that? Comedy album that he recorded. That was very. This was an era too where comedy albums were big. I remember Cosby had some very successful comedy albums at that time too, and Flip had one that did quite well. I think his Christopher Columbus routine is on that album. Yes. And the TV show was just hugely successful. Now, I want to ask you something about the character of Geraldine, who debuted with the TV show. Flip was a storyteller, and every time he would have a character, every time he would have a woman character, he would always have her speaking in the Geraldine voice, even before the character of Geraldine was created. If you remember in the Christopher Columbus story, Queen Isabella has Geraldine's voice.
Yeah, that was his falsetto voice, and that was just it. And so Geraldine came into being on the television series because producers wanted him to play a female character, and so it automatically would be that voice.
Because that was the voice that he always used whenever he had a female character.
Whenever he had a dialogue between a woman and anybody, that would be the voice he used.
Well, that was part of what made the Columbus routine so funny, was that Queen Isabella talked like Geraldine.
Right, yeah. Well, I guess Queen Isabella and Geraldine were the same, yeah. But But, at that time, most comedians played female characters, Milton Berle and
Yes.
a lot of the others.
Right.
So it was a natural thing for them to ask him to do that, and he went along with it. But he made sure that Geraldine had dignity, that
Yes.
she dressed well, and that she was not a pushover, and that was very important to him.
Yes, I always remember, because Flip had so many lines that he would use over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember one of his Geraldine lines that he would always use is he would have her say, "Don't touch me. Don't you ever touch me. You don't know me that well." Do you remember?
That's right. Yes.
And it was very funny, but it was also very feisty, and he had that quality going for him. It was always a very feisty quality, not really angry, but he was not somebody who was going to be pushed around, and Geraldine was not somebody who was going to be pushed around.
No.
And she was also funny and flirtatious, of course, but also, it was important to him that she be somebody who stood up for herself and had great dignity.
That's right. That's exactly true. I met the lady who was the prototype for Geraldine after he died, though, in Jersey City, and she was in his grade school class, and she was just a little girl that he liked, and that's why he named the character Geraldine.
Okay,
she died last year.
So
too,
there was there really was a Geraldine.
There was a real Geraldine, right?
Okay.
Yeah, she was just a pretty little girl with starch dresses, he said, and she just looked so nice all the time.
He had, I've always noticed about him when I look at some of these old clips, or even in my memories of him as a kid watching his TV show, there was a kind of joyous quality about Flip Wilson's comedy. It was like fun. And, there's all kinds of ways to be funny. And there were comics who were edgy. There were comics who have a kind of cynical quality. Like I think of somebody like Richard Pryor, who's also a wonderful comedian, who I think worked on Flip's show, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, they were friends and lived near each other for a while. And yeah, Richard was on the show a couple times.
He was on the show, and I remember George Carlin being on the show also.
Right.
He was important, and they had a very different approach to Flip. Then there's, it was more like in some ways social commentary. Flip stayed away from that. He always kind of kept it light, I think.
Yeah, he stayed away from politics for the most part. He did, and he wanted to be funny to everybody, and he wanted everybody's grandmother to like him. He would talk about
Yeah, that's true. He was very family friendly. And it's interesting because you talk about Red Fox. Now, I think Red had some problems because Red's comedy, as funny as he was much more sexual. And I think a lot of Red's stuff couldn't be done on television. At least back in those days, it couldn't be.
No, absolutely not. But he used to brag about the fact that he never got bleeped on television. He knew when to turn it off.
He knew exactly
and
what
when
to
to
do.
do it. But he resided in blue humor. Yeah, right.
He made those, I think they called them party records at the time, that were considered somewhat risque.
Right.
Now, he had been a kind of mentor to Flip, but Flip got his own show before Red did, and I seem to remember that Red Fox made frequent appearances on Flip's TV show on NBC, and I suspect that probably had something to do with him getting Sanford and Son, was the exposure that he got from being on Flip Wilson's program.
I think so. Flip's show started in 1970, and I believe Sanford and Son started in 72 or 3.
I think so, yes.
So it was shortly afterwards, yeah. And it was still NBC. And see, the people at NBC got to know Red because he was there. He'd come to the studio even when he wasn't on the show, and just kind of be there with Flip sometimes. And so people got to know him and felt comfortable with him after a while.
And, of course, another wonderful show, and he became another huge star. Now, as people have pointed out, there was nobody bigger than Flip Wilson in show business in the early 70s. And I've always been a little bit puzzled. He did the show for 4 seasons, and I think he did a special after the show ended. I'm told that he would have gotten picked up for another season, but he chose not to. And I know he never completely retired, at least not at that point, but he seemed to have put his career on the back burner when the series ended in 74. He was a young man at the time. He was still only 40 years old. And that seems unusual to me, that somebody who works as hard as he obviously did to achieve so much seemed to kind of put the show, to put the career on the back burner. Am I right about that? And could you shed some light on
Okay, some of the things that happened, there were a lot of things that happened at the same time. One thing was the show didn't seem as funny as it had been. And he had carried the show with a lot of his written material that he'd had over the years, and he'd run out of material. He said he was losing his funny because he didn't have any written jokes, and we would tell him, you don't lose your funny, you have that. But he never would hire anybody to write routines for him. He always wanted to do his own, and he felt like it just was not holding up to the standards that he had already set. And that was the main thing that discouraged him for stopping the series. Also, there were a lot of rumors around about his sexuality because of his playing Geraldine so well. People would say he has to be gay if he's playing that character so well, and he just couldn't deal with that. And so he didn't want to play Geraldine anymore.
Okay. And people expected that because Geraldine was so much a part of the show.
And, and we had a little thing personally over that because I always told him I would never laugh unless I was tickled. I was not going to sit there and laugh. Sometimes on a TV show, the writers laugh louder than anybody at a rehearsal because they've written it. But I thought that's misleading the talent when you do that. So one day he said, "You don't like Geraldine, do you?" And I said, "No, I love Geraldine. Geraldine's very funny. I just don't want you to be known as the person who played Geraldine." And he said, "Don't worry, I won't." But that's pretty much the case.
Okay. Now, after the show ended, he did a few things here and there. I would have expected him maybe to go back on the road, but I don't think he ever really did. And
he did some clubs. He did Las Vegas and San Francisco. And he did a TV show.
I remember that. It was called Charlie and Company.
Gladys
Knight. And also, if I'm right, Jaleel White, this was pre-Family Matters. I think, didn't Jaleel White play his son on this program?
That's correct, yes.
It didn't really work, unfortunately, and I debuted the year after Bill Cosby's sitcom, which, of course, was very successful. And
the critics said it was too much like The Cosby Show, that it was a copy of The Cosby Show. And Flip had never even seen The Cosby Show, so he didn't know what they were talking about.
He had a very different style.
Yeah, right.
So tell me about the last years of his life. We've heard there were rumors, I don't know if this is true, there were rumors about drugs and alcohol. I don't know, were those issues in his life? And what were the last years of Flip's life like?
Not so much alcohol. He liked his beers. But he did, marijuana was his first love, I would say.
Okay.
And he did have some experiences with cocaine, not crack cocaine. And I don't know if it got worse or if I just noticed it more as time passed. But he felt that marijuana was good for you. And in fact, he advised people to do it, but he didn't really. And he tried to break the cocaine. He told me that many times. And you don't really believe people who are on drugs if they're really doing that. But then his friends told me later that he really did. Every time he told me he was trying to get off the cocaine. Yeah, and he died of liver cancer, which was brought on by hepatitis C.
Okay.
And we don't know at what point he got that. The doctor said years ago. And I don't know if years is 5, 10, 15, 20 years. I don't know how many years we're talking about. But that's the way it was. But his life, he was still enjoying life. He loved his motorcycles, Harley Davidsons. He was in the Harley Davidson Club, and he did, I remember he did one ride from Portland, Maine to Portland, Oregon, or the other way. So
it went cross country.
Yeah, and he traveled a lot. And
I've heard something about hot air ballooning too.
Oh yes, he loved the hot air balloons, and that's something that he did with Rocky Aoki, who the Benihana restaurants. That was his buddy, and Rocky had a balloon, and Flip would go up with him in his balloon.
Let me just ask you something. The book is called, what's the title?
It's really not definite yet, but it's Flip Wilson. What you see is what you get.
That's a wonderful. That is a wonderful title, and I'm really looking forward. As you know, I've been kind of bugging you about this. I'm eager to read this book. I'm a huge Flip Wilson fan, and I want to thank you so much. We really do appreciate your being with us, and it's an honor to speak with you. And Kathleen Fearn-Banks, thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Tom. Okay.
Goodbye.